Hello everyone. Today we are going to play one more good old classic, FTB Ultimate. Which is also the pack where I first encountered GregTech. Anyways, we shall quickly get started with a new world. And we spawned close to a village that seems to not have any loot chest. After a quick peek at it, we get started and do the usual vanilla stuff. Meaning we rush a bed and then gather some materials. Now that we have a bed and some food, we can go gather some minerals. And that should be enough to get our base started. And the first thing we shall do is get some building materials. We are going to make our base with the good old trusty stone bricks. And after some work, here we have our new shelter with a nice window on the sky. Now we can start processing the minerals with an old pulverizer. This is from before the introduction of Forge Energy, back when we used Minecraft jewels. Now, before moving on with our factory, we shall get some proper tools, such as a power armor. This armor doesn't even look cool in that version, and, as we made it, it only provides a different cosmetic. To make it have any use, we need a power armor tinker table. That requires 1 emerald, which we didn't find while mining, but luckily, villagers' trades exist in that version. And that guy has a nice offer. We accept this quest from the guild hall and quickly proceed to fill it. And thus we have our thinker's table to tweak our armor. Inside that we can see our armor equipped modules and we can add, remove or edit them. The first thing we want is to add some plating so that it provides some protection. We quickly craft the material required for the upgrade and proceed into installing it into our armor. Next, we can choose how thick we want our plating to be. The more thick, the more protection we gain, but we also have more weight to carry around. Since we want to be well protected, we install it at maximum defense on each part of our armor, and thus we have an unbreakable armor as good as a diamond one but made out of iron. The issue is that it's heavy. To work around that, we can install some augmentations on our leggings to help us walk with all of that weight. And again we can tweak how powerful and in what way these augmentations shall help us walk. However, these require power, so we also have to install the battery, which is going to increase further up our weight. And, of course, we need some generators to charge up our batteries. However, all of the generators we can embed in our armor require control circuits, which require glowstone. Before going into the Nether, we craft a power tool, which will make any other tool obsolete, freeing a lot of hotbar space. This robotic arm can do about everything you could need, such as the basic mining tools. To get the obsidian, we can upgrade it with some diamonds, and we should probably overclock the pick feature at the maximum for that task. And thus, we can now punch obsidian without bare robotic hands. Before going into the Nether, we should get some more cool features, such as a railgun. Or maybe we can get that later on. For the moment, let's make a melee assistant be enough. Then we fully charge our armor with an IC2 generator. Once we are fully charged and equipped, we proceed into a Nether expedition, where our only objective shall be gathering a couple of glowstone dusts. We quickly accomplish the mission and then run back. With that rushed loot, we can finally make a couple of HV capacitors and thus we can install a railgun in our robotic hand. And, of course, we crank it at maximum power. The railgun has 2 main purposes. One is to be used as a long-range weapon. But, the most important one, is that we can use it to fly around by using its kickback. And thus we were able to quickly find a desert, where we can gather the other missing ingredient for the control circuits, cactus. And with that we can have a solar generator on our helmet. And we can also get night vision goggles. Then an auto feeder so that we won't have to manage food. And an electrolyzer for when we go diving. But, the real cool thing is getting a kinetic generator. This will produce energy when we walk, but it will make walking harder. However, it produces more than the exoskeleton assistant uses. But this is a tech pack, so enough fooling around. We shall make a bunch more of the old thermal expansion machines. And we shall use these to expand our base, since the real machines, the GregTech ones, will need more space. And, while we wait for the building materials, we can do some more resource gathering. But it looks like it is going to take a while more for the basic processing stuff. So we shall use that time to go gather more ender pearls in the end for some more armor upgrades. And, on our way to the end, we found a dungeon. While exploring the dungeon, we found one more fun toy, a portal gun. This is one more memory of great games. For those of you who don't know, this item allows us to create portals on the walls so that we can easily move around. It can also be used to move around any mob or item. And, yes, its best usage was to troll people when playing on multiplayer servers. Anyways, going back to our adventure, once we managed to find and complete the end portal, we started gathering some ender pearls. But, when we had enough and wanted to go back, we found out that the portal gun was not going to bring us away from that nasty place. And thus it was time for the usual long battle with the dragon. Or at least we feared it would have been a long battle. The railgun is overpowered, and in this version the dragon is the vanilla one. Once we took care of having a way back, we can go back and mind our business in pace. And thus we are bringing back some sodalite, some sealite and some tungstate. With the ender pearls we are going to make some force field emitters, which can be used for a weightless armor that provides more protection than a diamond one but at cost of energy. And thus we can lift some weight out of our armor. One other cool thing we can do with these things is add a plasma cannon to our hand. Anyways, to fix our portal issues and make our base work properly, we make a chunk loader. And now we can go back to our base from any place. Now that we have secured some materials and a new room, we can move on from the machines that will use redstone force and start working on the GregTech ones. This version of GregTech actually works as an IC2 add-on, so we have to start with a bat box and a generator from said mod. We make a line of LV cabling and place a compressor too. And now it is time to do some GregTech stuff. As usual, we start from a bending machine. And if you wonder why I didn't start from the wire mill, it's because it requires plates. Also, apparently, it can be made with machine hulls from any mod. After quickly crafting and placing it, we can start using it and notice that it makes 3 wires from an ingot. Then comes the assembler, which, for the moment, we are not going to use, since the minium stones trades makes the crafting table circuit recipe cheaper than the assembler one. Next we make a centrifuge for cheaper rubber. And, to start working our ores, an electrolyzer. However, that requires MV power, but since we can tier skip, we rush an HV battery, the MFSU. But now our puny coal generator can barely make the power level of our battery tick up. So we make a couple of thermal generators. And a setup to pump some lava from the Nether, which we bring to our new generators using a good old tesseract which doesn't even require power to work. And thus we should have increased our power generation by a factor of 5. Thus we should have enough power to afford making an energy bridge to convert IC2 power into buildcraft power. And so we can finally have a proper power source for our RF machines, which are still useful for a handful of tasks. Now we can go back to our first MV machine, the electrolyzer. We shall use that to get stuff like aluminium out of sodalite. But, the most important thing we need to electrolyze is bauxite, which will give us not rutile but straight up titanium dust. And, of course, to cook that stuff we need an EBF, which we swiftly craft, and that machine was a power hog multiblock even back in these days. We can see the structure guideline inside the UI. After crafting and quickly building its structure, we realized that, In this version, there is no muffle hatch. So, after closing off the top, we see that the light turns green and we have a heat capacity of 1020 Kelvin. Which is not enough for smelting titanium. And, for some reason, aluminium here has an even higher working temperature. If we look at the UI, we see 2 red dots in the structure. That is because we can increase the furnace temperature by adding some lava inside it. So we grab 2 buckets, take some lava out of our generators and proceed into dropping it inside the blast furnace. And thus we reached 1520 Kelvin, enough for titanium but not for aluminium. So, let's fire up our electric lava furnace with titanium. After a long cooking time, we got 2 ingots which we turn into plates and use to make a rock cutter, which is a power tool that will acquire Silk Touch 3 once fully charged up. We can use that to gently take minerals out of the rock without damaging them, so that we can then throw these inside an industrial grinder to get more dust out of our ores. Going back to our EBF, we would also like to manage to cook aluminium. To increase our heat capacity, we first make some steel, which we use to make some reinforced casings. Each one will increase the temperature by 20 Kelvin, and we can even mix the blocks. We place them in a familiar way, until we reach 2000 Kelvin. However, to smelt later game materials, we need to reach 3000. We could rebuild the whole structure with the expensive advanced machine casings, but instead we are going to make a bunch of coils. To make these, we start off by cooking some aluminium, since we now are able to do so. While the aluminium cook, we grind down some rubies into dust. And then we electrolyze some chromium out of them, which we shall cook as soon as the aluminium is done. Once everything is ready, we rush to the rolling machine where we assemble the new coils. To apply them, we simply click on the controller, and finally we reached the temperature required for tungsten. But, as you probably are thinking, you can't say tungsten EBF without running out of power. So, it is time to increase our power production. The first upgrade we shall do is a gas turbine, so that we can recycle the methane and hydrogen made as byproduct of various processes. Next, to have some perpetual generation, we make an automated farm with factorization. We are going to use a sawmill to get the most out of the wood, and we also work the sawdust into charcoal for extra fuel generation. Then we burn all that fuel into a classical railcraft boiler to make steam. Once it heated up and started producing steam, we feed that into a steam consumer of an energy bridge, which will then feed power to the farm and send the leftover to our base. This system also makes some sludge fluid, which we pipe into a sludge boiler that will send back to use some extra goodies. However, after some time, we realize that our farm outproduces the boiler consumption, so we increase the size of our boiler. Once this big boy starts producing energy, we realize that we have a surplus production even while using the blast furnace, so we start looking for a good use for that extra power. We shall make a mass fabricator, which is going to take quite a few crafting steps, and the only thing preventing us from making it is the Lipotronic energy orb, or better, the iridium plate. We are going to need an implosion compressor, and also some iridium. I haven't found any iridium ore, and I don't remember if it even spawns in this version. To get it we have 2 other options, both of which include platinum, and we can get half iridium ingot from each sheldnite ore if we work it with mercury in an industrial grinder. Sheldnite is a quite mimetic ore found in the end. If we want to gather a proper amount, we should go off to the small floating islands. However, our current way of flying isn't good enough for that. Instead, we shall gather some ender peels, so that we can craft some thrusters that we can attach to our armor for a proper jetpack flight. Once we have properly attached and configured the jetpack, we can rush back to the end and finally fly towards the small floating islands, where the needed materials await us. And now that we have all the required materials, it is time for a crafting sequence. Now that we have managed to craft it, we can place it in the middle of the machine room. And since we want to keep some energy stocked up, we use an EU splitter cable to toggle it on and off. Other than energy, scraps are mandatory, but we can use any material dust in place. For now we shall use thorium. And that machine uses a lot of power to produce nothing. So, now we can try to find better ways of making power. We start by using the surplus wood from our farm. And with 2 boiler, we still have excess fuel production and almost make a full HV amp. But that is still nothing since that machine can take many amps of IV power. If we want to properly feed it, we are going to need a fusion reactor. However, that is a complex machine to make with many steps that require a lot of materials. We do not have AE2 to help us with that, but we have its precursors, AE1. We start by making some cabling and some logistic processors. I mean, basic processors. Then we make an ME drive with some cells. Instead of having formation and annihilation cores, we have a single conversion matrix, which we use for our first crafting terminal. Finally, we make some engineering processors, here called advanced processors, to make a controller, which actually works as an energy acceptor. We start building our AE1 system by dropping down the controller and giving it power. Then we add our disk drive with all the cells we made. And to interact with it, we add our crafting terminal. Now we can drop in all the items we have. Now, to do auto crafting, we need a couple of interfaces and a CPU. And here the CPU is a multiblock with a variable structure. We shall start by making the smallest one. Bigger ones can carry more patterns or craft faster. But this is actually a molecular assembler with embedded interface. To make patterns we need an encoder, and, of course, some patterns to encode. As usual, the first patterns we shall prepare are the conversion matrix and the interface, so that we can expand our system. Since these are crafting table recipes, we drop them by the giant molecular assembler. And now time to test out if it works. Looks like it works faster than newer versions too. Now time to encode some assembler recipes. As we should have expected, we can't drag stuff from NEI. So, as in the annoying not too good days, we have to manually craft the first item each time. Now that we have all the inputs and outputs, we can encode the pattern. We place it in an interface on assembler setup and try to run it. And it almost worked. Just need to click one more button. Now that we have fixed the inputs, we have to wait 2 minutes to test the output. And I can't manage to make the assembler output to the interface. An import bus is kinda of expensive, so we go with a more brutal approach. But, for some reason, I couldn't manage to make even that approach work. Also, the way lack of crafting materials and crafting monitoring works isn't as good as in newer versions. So I think we should go back to using chests and math like Chad artisans did in the good old times. Going back to our fusion reactor, we shall start from making the controller. It has many steps, and we should start by gathering some more emeralds. We can get them from this NPC vendor, which we totally did not kidnap from the Sky Round village. And to gather some wool to trade with him, we spend a lot of time with some wheat in our hands to lure some sheep into walking miles to get in our herd. However, after all of that work, the vendor now refuses to buy the wool we had to work hard to so it is time to send him back home using alien technology. Going back to our project, instead of emeralds, we shall use the olivine we gathered in the end. And once we have all the parts, we can make the 2 computer cubes. These are not just crafting parts but can be placed and used in various ways. For example, to simulate an IC2 fission reactor, which we are not making because it's not as cool as a pink donut. So we take it back and remember that, in this version, like IC2, GregTech machines have a chance of breaking when being removed. And, while on a mining trip while waiting for the parts to make a new one, we have found the rare iridium ore, which looks like a lena, and I'm sure if a rock cutter can take it. So, we shall take it with our bare hands. And here we have one of the many pieces of iridium that we are going to need. We can also use an IC2 miner, but these things pick up more trash than materials. Going back to our little project, we now have the second computer and we shall move on into working at the first of the 32 coils. These require some nasty stuff, but I think the worst one is the iridium reflector. These will make each coil cost go up by 1 iridium plate and 8 beryllium cells. Not to mention the 32 dense copper plates, totaling 4 stacks of copper per coil. To have some extra copper, we can centrifuge lava, which can also be made out of nothing with a lava fabricator. For the moment, we are going to rebuild and repurpose our nether pump and start centrifuging that. While we build up extra copper, we can go back and check how to make beryllium. Apparently, it can only be made by electrolyzing ender pearls or emeralds. I think the most automatable ways has to be using portal mechanics. On a second thought, that is not automatable and neither fun. So we move on to the next step, using a grinder. Once we set it up, we have to trigger some endermans and bait them to teleport into its range. And then we just watch it doing its things from the high of the sky. That setup will also produce some monster essence, which we can teleport back to our base, where we make use that essence to power a mob farm to produce even more pearls. Look at how they drop fast. Once we have some to start working with, we can proceed into pulverizing and electrolyzing these. And thus we finally have the beryllium. We also get some nitrogen and potassium as byproduct, which can be used to make gunpowder for the explosives to compress the iridium plates. Finally, we compress a lot of copper, so that we can fill our inventory with neutron reflector that we combine into the iridium neutron reflector. The only thing left to make is the superconductor, which will need 1 more iridium plate. So, while our assemblers are working on the energy flow circuits, we head back to the end to mine more sheldonite. While there, we can also gather some sodalite, which can be electrolyzed to obtain some sodium. And we use that for making sodium-potassium coolant cells. Now that we have everything, we can finish our superconductor and then complete the first fusion coil. Finally, we can appreciate the crafting process of the fusion control computer without any video speed up. To get started, we prepare a donut of dirt and place the computer as the first final block that touches the ring in the inner side. Now we have to craft a lot of stuff, and we shall start from the coils. To do that, the first step shall be to step on our charge pad so that we keep our armor charged while being AFK. After being AFK for some time, our centrifuges managed to make some copper and electrum, which are fundamental for the coils. Now, the copper will be required for all the neutron reflectors. And the electrum will greatly cut the cost of the circuits. But the main issue is going to be the highly advanced machine block. We need 2 stacks of titanium and 2 of chromium. Titanium could be made by staying AFK to stock up matter, but chromium can only be made by rubies. And that would make us have to dig 7 stacks of them? Which is not going to happen. The IC2 miner doesn't seem to work properly, so we shall take its drill and upgrade it to a quarry. And we can get some extra diamonds by compressing all the junk that came out of the sludge of our farm. On diamond you can't grow flowers, but you can use sludge to make diamonds that can craft a quarry that will gather every useful resource you could possibly need. We place it with some tesseract to manage its input and outputs, then we can watch its robot build the structure. Once the frame is complete, the head will start running with all the power of about 1 blast furnace. On the other side of the tesseract, we are managing the output in the worst possible way, since I can't find any better compatible pipe. After some time, we have managed to fill 1 super chest of cobblestone and we can see about what we are going to get from our quarry, so we can move our tesseract to a better sorting facility. We shall stock inside some barrels all of the garbage from decorative mods that can cause visual glitches and lag, while we keep the good stuff inside this chest. Then, since we are going to have a lot of extra quartz, we can use that to make input buses and other AE1 stuff to automate the processing. And we shall invest 2 coils worth of machine hulls in a quantum chest to see how much cobblestone we dig. So, time to start using all of that goodies. We shall also improve our workshop to be more automatic. However, it looks like back in the day, artisans used to make good stuff by hand, and not with ugly automated setups. You can tell by the lack of vanilla hoppers and how hard it is to get stuff out of chests and machines. And, after many tries, I gave up on trying to get plates out of a bending machine. It has something that looks like the newer auto output function, but I'm too clumsy to make it work. Anyways, we make a second grinder and we wall share it with the older one. And stock it up with some water using the worst pipes we could find. Next we also make an electrolyzer. And now we make AE1 craft some input and export buses. Automating thermal expansion is rather easy, but these old rusty GregTech machines require us to find the correct side for each input. And with that we have automated almost everything like a good virgin engineer should do. The only problematic thing left to manage is iridium. The only way I know of getting it in good amounts is with matter. However, we managed to make only 3 pieces since when we build the matter fabricator. So, maybe we could do a fission reactor for the moment. Or we could make one ultimate solar panel, which will give a longer use to the uranium we aren't using. Or maybe not, since that requires half fusion reactor worth of iridium. Now, a vacuum reactor would make quite some power. However, the vacuum freezer would use all that power to cool down the coolant cells. So we have to move on to something more efficient. And there we have a quick and dirty plutonium reactor which makes about as much power as 2 railcraft boilers. We won't use the quad cells because these take too much copper. And, once our quarry runs out, we make one more so that it won't be alone in his next location. Double the quarry, double the fun. And now time to AFK while we stock up resources. Once we have enough, we can start improving our base with the following automation sequence. Once we complete the donut, we add 2 input material injectors, 1 material ejector and 4 energy injectors, which have the same location of the GTNH fusion reactors. Next, we connect the power and we wait for the reactor internal buffer to charge up. With our current production, that will take about a quarter of an hour. While we wait, let's prepare the fuel. We start by electrolyzing some hydrogen out of water. Next we centrifuge some deuterium out of that. Finally, we make some tritium out of deuterium. Now, when we will fuse deuterium and tritium, we are going to get some helium plasma, which, to be used, requires a plasma generator. That machine contains some tungsten steel, which, as the tooltip says, has to be vacuum hardened. So, while our tungsten steel is cooking, we shall work on a vacuum freezer. And, as expected, that is a multi-block machine. But it's always the same machine hulls and we quickly complete it. Meanwhile, our fusion reactor reached 1/4 of the charge. But that might be the maximum of our reactor, since we only have 4 of the 16 maximum energy injectors. So, let's try giving it some fuel and let's see if it works. The lights did not turn on, but we lost all of our stored energy. But it looks like we managed to get 1 cell of plasma. To keep a sustained fusion, we craft 1 more energy injector and attach it to the coils. After buffering up enough power again, we drop in the fuel. And, this time, the lights turned on and we are producing a constant flux of helium plasma. Other than the hot plasma, we also have hot tungsten steel, and only 1 of the 2 shall go inside the vacuum freezer. And thus we have our plasma generator, which we shall place right next to the matter fabricator. Finally, we feed it some plasma so that we can finally have a proper UU matter production. Our matter fabricator is indeed receiving so much power that it can't even work that fast and its energy buffer is filling up. And, as you probably noticed, that's not just the power of 1 plasma generator, it's also the power of the new generators on the wall. The only thing left to do is to show off our cobblestone collection in our AE1 system, so we make a storage bus and connect it to the quantum chest.